All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, excited for this one. So I think Thank you. Oh. All right, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Uh the so essentially the plan is I'll start, we'll do a little bit of check-in with the audience in the chat so we can see where people are joining from. I thought instead of asking their favorite book, like the most recent book, what might be a fun little question to ask them. I usually do a little poll, some housekeeping stuff. It is a webinar as opposed to like a Zoom meeting, so we won't see anyone else. And then yeah, I was gonna have one slide introducing you. Let me just show you that to make sure I didn't get anything horribly wrong. Um, all right.
Yeah, let me just zoom in, but
Oh, sorry, you want me to make it
oh no,
bigger?
no, it looks good. It looks good. Perfect. Perfect. Yep, that looks good. Rise of the Reader. Sure. Yeah, all of that looks great.
Okay, cool. So then I'm just gonna do, because I do have about half the audience is brand new to me, and obviously ultimately this is a marketing thing for me and the stuff I do. I'm gonna do like a hopefully 5 minute spiel about my business and what I do. And ultimately, we're trying to drive people towards this program that we're running starting next month. Um, but I'll try to do it in the context of how reading fits into all this. But try not to spend too much time because that's not really the main point. Um, just, yeah, this is one last thing, and we're just getting people into our WhatsApp group. And then I'll turn the slides off, and then we'll just have a conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought we'd start just with your story. How do I stop sharing? I don't even know. Maybe I shouldn't stop sharing because people are going to be here any second. Yeah, so I thought I'd start with your story, and then the main topic was the how to help your teen swap screen time for reading time. So I'd probably hit that question or variation thereof next. And then I have some other notes of things to ask maybe, but just let the conversation sort of evolve organically. Um,
Okay.
and then what about the book giveaways?
Yeah, so what I typically do is just receive addresses. So
Mhm.
however many you want to give away, 5, 10, and 20, it doesn't matter as long as they're US based addresses.
Yep.
And I'll sign each one and send them individually. If what my team usually does is we will collect entries into the giveaway, typically emails or Instagram usernames, and then there are these random generator like kind of wheel
Yeah,
things that
yeah.
you paste all of them in. You just, you don't have to screen record, but you screen record a couple of winners, you notify them, send me the addresses, I'll mail the books. So
Okay.
that's how we
So it's
typically do
more
it.
like, so it doesn't necessarily happen right on the call. You're not
Right.
okay. I was
Unless you
thinking
want,
maybe something like best question or something like that. Like if we identify someone who's particularly, good in the group.
sure, yeah, you can call people out. Hey, I love that question. We're going to give away a book. Everybody keep commenting,
Right,
however you
right.
want to do it.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. I'm gonna hit start and then we'll be off. Uh, Assalamu alaikum. Is it showing the full screen or just part screen? Yeah, there
There
we
we
go.
go. That looks good.
All right, that looks good. Hi, welcome everyone. It is great to have everyone here. People are coming in fast and furious. We're up to 35 and growing. Alhamdulillah, we're really excited for this webinar. I've been Alhamdulillah, I do quite a few of these, but this one's been circled on my calendar for a long time. So we're really blessed and lucky to have Nick Hutchison with us, who's I actually came across him through a tennis friend who plays basketball with him. And he said, I have this friend who, does this he has a reading podcast and I imagine it was a fairly small thing, like a small little book group, but then I Googled him and I was like, whoa, this guy knows what he's doing. This is the real deal. And just reached out to him on LinkedIn and when I talked to him, I was like, my audience has to hear about this. These Muslim teenagers that I work with really need to hear about the power of reading because this pain point that we have on in the title, how to encourage our kids to uh, discover a love for reading during this digital age where you know, Instagram and TikTok and everything is vying for our attention. How can we help our teenagers swap the screen time for the reading time? And I think when you hear Nick's story and you see what reading has done for him and the specific actionable strategies that he's going to be able to teach us, I think people will take away a tremendous amount. Um, so as I like to do, let's just say a conscious Bismillah. So we're beginning this with the proper niyyah in the name of Allah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani. Asking that we have the right intention for what we're going to get out of tonight, inshallah. Um, so I want to see who's with us today. If people could share in the chat where you're joining from, your name, obviously, where you're joining from, and then the most recent book you read for fun. Okay, so for our students here, uh, let's try not to put our school assigned books, but the books we read for fun. And I know there are a lot of parents here as well, so please do that as well. So let's see if those can start coming into the chat. Should all see that in the bottom there. Okay, Mustafa from Fremont, New York, an Animal Farm, nice. Abdullah Akbar, the Two Towers, DC, Yamato Dynasty. Houston, Texas. The recording will be shared afterwards. I saw that question for all the registrants, inshallah. Singapore. Wow. Houston, Boston. I don't see a lot of books here. Is that a hard question? Uh, Battle for the American Mind. Interesting. Let's see. Sacramento, Orange County, UK. Massachusetts, Houston. Wow. From New Hampshire. Nice. Um, Amazing. The Crucible, The Power of Now. All right. We're getting a good sense of things and things are still coming in. All right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up a poll so we can get a little bit better sense of the who's with us today. So if you can a poll should pop up asking a few questions. And once you get a chance to answer the questions, leave it open for a minute or two. Let's see what more things have come in. Any of these books stand out to you, Nick? Are these anything that you've also read?
I just saw the Miracle Morning pop in. I've spent quite a bit of time with Hal Elrod. He's a favorite of mine. I've interviewed him on my podcast a couple of times, and that book had a really big impact on my life. So that was the first one that I saw when I opened up the chat. That's a great one. Have you read it?
I have not. Remind me the name again?
The Miracle Morning.
The Miracle Morning.
See the
I've read the 5 a.m. Club, but
Yeah,
yeah.
the 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma is another good one. He's been on our podcast a couple of times as well. And two good friends of the Book Thinkers show. And I love that idea of getting up early in the morning, having some structure. I think that you can accomplish a lot while other people are sleeping, and that's a fun way to think about it.
That's great. Yeah, beautiful. Um, Okay, we've got about 70% of you guys have filled in the poll, and most people are here. You can see we have audience sort of from all over the country, all over the world. It's always really cool to see who shows up. We have more than 350 people registered for this event, so super excited to learn from you. All right, I'm going to end this poll and just share those results so we can all see who's here. So we have a lot of mothers, mashallah. A lot of mothers, and then high school students is our next biggest group, and then a few fathers, some middle school students, and then a few others. Um, so in terms of grades, good. We got ninth grade is in the house. They're representing the most. And but a nice mixture across where our five before college, those 5 years before college. Uh, 40% at public school, 25% Islamic school, some private school, homeschool. Nice. A lot from the Northeast, but also Texas and the Southwest, and a handful from outside. Cool. Always great to see where people are from. Um, so just a little housekeeping. Like I just said, we have a lot of registrants, which is great. Both the chat and the Q&A are enabled. The chat's more for sort of discussion. Maybe, you guys can go a little bit back and forth, share comments and things like that. But the Q&A, which is a separate button, you might have to go to more to find it. I'm not sure. Um, that's where you should actually leave questions that you'd like Nick or myself to answer. And just because this has happened before, please do not spam the chat or start, just taking it over because that has been a problem. And inshallah, stay tuned until the end because we will be sharing some info about how you can get a free signed copy of Nick's book, which we're really excited about. Um, so, um, I was, in doing this, I tried to put a little, do a little bit of research into Nick. Um, I don't know if you talk about the C student thing in your book, but I know in our conversation, you sort of mentioned that a self-described C student who sort of discovered the love of books in his 20s, and we're definitely gonna get into that story because I know that's so central to who you've become. He's the founder of Book Thinkers, a seven-figure marketing agency that helps authors connect with readers. I'm sure you can explain all this stuff a lot better than I can, Nick, but he's built a platform that reaches over 1 million people per month. Really impressive stuff. He hosts a great podcast. Highly encourage you guys to subscribe. Book Thinkers, life-changing books. And interviews very well-known people like Grant Cardone, Alex Hormozy, some names that you guys may have heard. Here in this picture, he's with Stephen Pressfield, author of The War of Art, which is an incredible book about sort of breaking through and leaning into your creative genius. We all have these big goals that we want to do, but it's so hard to break through that resistance. That book was incredibly helpful for me when I was choosing to sort of take the plunge into entrepreneurship and so on. And he's also the author of Rise of the Reader. I have it right here, and this is what we're going to be doing the giveaways of later. And overall, he's on a mission to help millions take action on what they learn and unlock their potential. So super excited to get started with Nick. I'm just going to give a little bit of background because we have a lot of new people in the audience who have never been to one of our events. And talk a little bit about myself, so take about 5 minutes and the five before college, and then we're gonna get straight into this interview. So, um, what we're really talking about today is ultimately people are often drawn to me and what I do because they really want their kids to find lots of success. They want their kids to be very successful. And especially in this competitive world of competitive college admissions. And so this picture always really, speaks to me that, if I ask you what's the one thing that you see in this picture, everyone, I've asked that millions of times, no one's ever said one of the black umbrellas. They always pick the red umbrella. So the idea of this high school experience is how can you become the red umbrella? And I think the thesis that I would have is that reading is one of the single best things to turn you into that person who's unrecognizable compared to all the other hordes of people. So many people applying to college have the perfect grades. They have the test scores, right? They have the obvious credentials, but they don't have that fire burning inside them. They don't have that perspective. They haven't, drunk from the wisdom of that's contained in books and so on. And so what we're talking about today is really hopefully going to help you learn how to become that red umbrella as you apply to college. So just very little bit about me. Alhamdulillah, I became Muslim at 15. Call myself a Mayflower Muslim because family on both sides went back to the Pilgrims and came over on the Mayflower. I graduated from Harvard in 2001 with a degree in uh, Near Eastern languages and civilizations. I helped really turn around the college counseling program at a small Islamic school here in Massachusetts. And now we send kids off to the Ivy League and other top colleges every single year. Overall, I've helped hundreds and hundreds, probably bordering on 1,000 Muslim students over the years in their path to college. And so I founded Five Before College to bring this all together. So five before college is Akhirah first college planning, starting 5 years before college. We have a proven track record of helping students get into top universities, places like Harvard, MIT, UC Berkeley, and way, way more than just that. The other part of the name is it's based on the five before five hadith, which I'll talk a little bit on the next slide. We offer premium one-on-one and group coaching programs like Find Your Qibla and the College Essay Boot Camp. And overall, we're just a one-stop shop for college prep starting as early as eighth grade. Inshallah, designed to help you get into your dream college while staying rooted to your faith. Um, and so this is the Prophet's hadith to take benefit of five before five, your youth before your old age, your health before sickness, your wealth before poverty, your free time before busyness, and your life before death. And this hadith has always meant a lot to me. It's amazing guide from 1400 years ago about how to lead a productive, holistic life. And it's incredible advice for teenagers to maximize their 5 years before college. And today, what we're really zeroing in on is youth before old age, right? Because as I put there, what it means to take advantage of your youth before old age is to take care of your academics, is to work on the grades and things like that, but more than anything to nurture your intellectual curiosity. And there's nothing that does that more than reading, which is the main topic for today. Um, this formula works. We've sent students off to all of these amazing universities and many, many more. Um, and our core program, and we have a cohort running in Ramadan, is called Find Your Qibla. My wife Ruhina, who's here, maybe she can drop a link in the chat with the application to that, in case anyone's interested. The purpose of this program is to help Muslim teenagers like the ones you see on the screen discover their purpose, discover their mission. And as it says here, figure out who they are, identify their passion, and create a blueprint for a passion project, for a sort of a side hustle for Muslim teens. Then launch that, figure out how to get that thing out into the world, and then get their great success. Inshallah. Uh, Last thing before we get into the interview, we do have a WhatsApp group. If you guys are in the WhatsApp group, could you just put in the chat I'm in? Because I bet a lot of you already are. If you're not, again, we can drop this into the chat. Let me make sure I have it. Why is it not letting me copy? Huh. And nice. Oops, I sent that to hosts and panelists. All right. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and stop talking so much because that's not what you came here for, and turn it over to Nick. So, um, yeah, I just wanted to start by like, your story is really incredible. And I want to just tell us more about how you grew up and sort of what the catalyst was. How did you get into reading and how did it change your life?
Sure. So I grew up in the Boston, Massachusetts area, the oldest of four boys. I always loved to brag about my parents. I think I had the world's best parents, and they were a great representation of unconditional love. I mean, they really supported all four of us and gave us all of the opportunities that we wanted in life. We did grow up reading quite a bit. I mean, I have great memories of my dad reading to me and my three brothers as we would fall asleep, basically through our entire childhood. He would read a lot of fictional, kind of teenage style books about knights and dragons and castles, and he would use all of the different voices, and it was a ton of fun. But then when I got to high school, I got into the world of sports. And for some reason, at the time that I went to school, the athletes and academics weren't typically running in the same circles. And so I fell into that athlete stereotype. I played football and I was captain of the wrestling team, and I really enjoyed being able to exercise my competitive nature through sports. And as a result, I kind of started to stray away from the academic side. I was a pretty bad student, as you highlighted in the introduction. And I don't think I talked that much about it in the book, but I was definitely a C student. Now, I was capable of doing the work, but I deliberately chose not to, which is an interesting part of my story. I mean, I was in AP calculus with a 0% homework average, right? That kind of kid. And all of that changed for me. And we can go back and dive into that in a minute if you want to in more detail. But it all changed for me when I was in college. Some of that same behavior continued with me for the first year or two of college. But as I was going from, I think, my sophomore into my junior year into my senior year of college, I took an internship at a local software company. And in this software company, my boss at the time, Kyle, introduced me to personal development podcasts. And Kyle was a cool guy. I wanted to be like Kyle. He was young, he was making a lot of money, he was very successful, he carried himself in a confident manner. And I thought, this is somebody I want to learn from. And so we'd go on some local sales trips, and he would put on these podcasts, like I said, where the world's most successful people would show up and share their secrets to success totally for free. And he told me, hey, Nick, listening to the same song or the same radio station to and from work every day or on these sales trips, it's probably not going to change your life. But listening to the right podcast or ultimately book, now that has the chance to change your life. Because these successful people are condensing decades of lived experience and their greatest life lessons into an hour long podcast or maybe days of consumption through a book. And so to wrap up my introduction here, after a while driving to and from this internship every day that summer, I heard a lot of the same books mentioned on these business podcasts. A lot of these successful people, at least financially successful, we could talk about defining success as well today. They were all sharing the same books. And so I went to my local Barnes and Noble one day during my lunch break, kind of list in hand. I walked in, I found the business book section. I picked up about 10 books and I went back and I started reading and I fell in love with what I was learning because, again, these books were condensing so much wisdom into days of reading. And I could identify a problem that I wanted to solve and solve it immediately, or a skill I wanted to build and implement it immediately, or a person I wanted to learn more about and learn about them immediately for $20 in a few hours of your time. And so that's my story. I was not a reader throughout high school or most of my college experience, but for the last 10 years, I've read 50 to 100 books a year willingly. And now I have an entire marketing agency built around books and a podcast like we talked about.
Yeah, amazing. It's such a great story, and you know, yeah, maybe a little later you can talk a little bit more because I think you've also taken an unconventional route in terms of how you've designed your life, and what you know all this reading has done for you and allowed you to sort of spend your 20s in a a very different way than maybe we could just speak briefly to that like what have your 20s been like?
In the first half of my 20s, I was an employee first. and an entrepreneur second. I always had book thinkers as a little bit of a side hustle. And as an employee, I was working for this software sales company. I went from intern to a regional sales rep, eventually to a director of sales. And as the company I worked for was acquired twice by two different VC companies, I continued to assume responsibility and grow professionally. So in the first half of my 20s, I was flying around the US, what felt like at least a few times a month, doing sales presentations in rooms of very successful business people. And oftentimes I was the youngest person in the room by 10 or 20 or 30 years. And so that helped me grow up pretty quickly. Then in the second half of my 20s, I shifted most of my attention into my business, Book Thinkers. I went from part-time entrepreneur to full-time entrepreneur. And then I spent the second half of my 20s growing that. Now, throughout that 10-year experience, I'm 31 years old now, or 31 years young, I guess I should say. But I also visited over 25 different countries. I found my wife. We fell in love. We got married. We had the most amazing wedding. We just welcomed our first kid into this beautiful world. And so I traveled the world. I made money. I built the business of my dreams. I married my wife. At the same time, I'm very spiritually connected as well. And I think that there's a great Tony Robbins line that I saw recently where he says, whatever you believe in, just make sure you pay a lot of attention to that. And so, although we might have slightly different beliefs, I'm very spiritually connected. I'm very focused in my faith. That's been a big aspect of my 20s as well. So, bounced around, employee, business owner, world traveler, digital nomad, and then got married.
That's beautiful. Nice. Yeah, so I wanted to switch into sort of the main topic and why I think a lot of the parents are here today and maybe the students as well. You know, in this digital era, this algorithm generation, where screens are adults and teens alike are just addicted to our devices. How can reading compete? Like what is your advice, for parents who are just constantly nagging their kids and trying to get them off their screens? How can a book compete with that, and what are some strategies you could recommend?
I have so many things to share on this subject. How much time do we have? The first thing I'll share is a very quick thing, is that oftentimes behaviors are caught, not taught. And so as a parent, I would be very conscious of how much you are using your device versus how much you are reading physical paper books in front of your children. Again, you can tell them to read all you want, but if you're sitting there scrolling on your phone or spending 3 or 4 hours in the evening in front of the television, they are going to replicate that behavior. Again, behaviors are typically caught, not taught. They're observing you, not listening to you. Now, if we can get to a place where you're reading and they're observing that behavior and they're starting to get curious, but they're still addicted to their phones. I hear this all the time. Nick, I want to read. I have the desire to read, but I just don't have the time. And so instead of trying to find time in your children's schedule or in your schedule, I simply recommend swapping out 15 minutes of scrolling on social media or watching television with reading a great book. Just 15 minutes. It could be the first 15 minutes of your scrolling on social media. It can be the last 15 minutes of your television before bed, which has a bunch of other benefits of shutting the TV off early. Just 15 minutes a day. Now, in 15 minutes, the average person can read about 10 pages. If you do that Monday through Friday, just 15 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, that's 50 pages a week. Now, so many of these great books are 200 pages or less. So that's one book a month simply by swapping out 15 minutes of screen time for 15 minutes of reading before you go to bed or first thing in the morning. Now, if you could do it in the morning and at night, you're doubling your page count. You're reading 20 pages a day, 5 days a week. That's 100 pages a week. That's a book every 2 weeks, 24 books a year. That's how fast it can happen. That's 24 different areas of your life that you can improve, 24 people you can learn about, 24 problems you can solve, 24 skills you can build simply by replacing a little bit of that screen time with something a little bit more productive. I'd also like to share that I think there is so much value in reading fiction. I like to focus most of my talks and most of my speaking and most of my own reading on nonfiction personal development and business type subjects, things like productivity and time management. You don't have to do it that way. There's a lot of benefits to reading fiction, but either way, putting the phone down and focusing on something with your full focus, what Cal Newport would call deep work, the ability to perform a task for an extended period of time, that's a skill set that you will strengthen by reading instead of scrolling.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, let me pick up on that fiction because that was I think that is a common question when we saw the books that people are reading for pleasure. The vast majority are fiction, and I think I was largely the same way. Like you see a lot of books behind me, pretty much all of those are fiction, and that's from most of my life. And then in the last 3 years or so, these are almost all nonfiction. Those are the books that I've gotten. Incidentally, I have a little life hack for people. I call it the eBay life hack. So every time someone like Nick recommends a book, I just look it up on eBay. Usually, unless it's just been published, you can get it for about $5 or less. And I just click buy now, and it arrives 10 days later and it gets added to the collection. Well, hopefully it gets read and then added to the collection. But that's made a huge difference. Um, I haven't met a lot of teenagers who do read a lot of nonfiction, and as much as I totally agree that getting them inspired to read anything, read what you love till you love what you read. Um, how would you go about like are there specific books that you would recommend for a teenager to as to dip their toes into this personal development nonfiction world?
Yes, I will answer that question, but first, just to share, I was in college, I was taking a public speaking class, and I gave a presentation on personal development books. And I remember my professor who was in a mood that day. He really wanted to play devil's advocate. And he challenged me to find more value in reading fiction, which I did. And he said something to me along the lines of, fiction is the only place that the impossible can become possible with the stroke of a pen. And I really liked that. I think that there's so much benefit in reading fiction or fantasy because in the nonfiction world, oftentimes you have authors writing in a very literal way. And oftentimes they're self-promotional, and we could go down that rabbit hole too. But in fiction, you're almost getting a more accurate representation of reality, of human emotions, of feelings, because the author is able to project outwards to a third-party character and therefore sometimes be a little bit more vulnerable. And so I like fiction from that perspective. Now, to answer your question about nonfiction, books that I wish I read when I was a teenager, there are so many of them. I'd start with a personal development classic, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. That book talks about the importance of financial literacy, a subject that is often not taught in the public education system. I also saw there were some homeschoolers and there are Islamic schoolers in here, so I'm not sure if that's different there, but that subject of personal finance. Now, I'm not talking about being a materialistic person. I'm talking about the fact that we are all forced to play the game of money when we become adults. With student loans, that's an important subject to talk about here. And what decisions we choose to make from a career perspective once we graduate. What direction would we like to go? How do we find our purpose, like you had alluded to earlier? And Rich Dad Poor Dad talks about how rich people think about money. And some of those perspective changes would have been really helpful for me before I made my college decision because I took on a lot of what I consider unnecessary debt in making that choice. And I would have had a different perspective had I read about the importance of financial literacy. So I'll pause there. Have you read that book before, Rich Dad Poor Dad?
Yeah, and not only have I read it, I actually teach it. At the same school, I taught an entrepreneurship class, and that was one
I
of
love that.
the first books we read. Another classic that I love teaching is The Magic of Thinking Big. And I think in your book you talk about play bigger triggers. And I think this is a concept that I'd like teenagers to think about. Could you talk a little bit more about what that means, play bigger?
Yeah, absolutely. uh, I was inspired to come up with this concept of play bigger triggers, PBTs, from a whole bunch of different authors because I would meet these very impressive people who were holistically successful, right? They're financially successful, they're healthy, they've got great relationships, they're spiritually connected, they seem to have it all. And there were a few things that I picked up. The first was from Stephen Pressfield, actually, who you highlighted in the intro slide. Stephen is a big mentor of mine. And he told me about a small replica cannon that he would keep on his desk. And I decided to buy one too, which is back on my bookshelves. And anytime he needed to be fired up with inspiration, he would turn the cannon from facing away to facing towards him, and he would be lit up, like he would get all of this energy. And it sounds kind of funny until you buy a cannon, you put it on your desk, you try it when you're feeling stuck, and all of a sudden you move past the obstacle. It's this fun little weird, in-person trigger that you have. And then I met Evan Carmichael, another one of my mentors. And he keeps, funny enough, a bag of Doritos in his office. And for him, he uses it in a little bit of a different way. He's reminded of a different life back when he was a little less healthy, and he uses that to check his vices. The bag is unopened and it's remained that way for many years. But again, it's an environmental cue that's physically in his space that reminds him of the path that he's on. And so I came up with that concept. I mean, I think of all of the books in my environment as play bigger triggers. I have the magic of thinking big over there. And every time I look at that title, I think of all of my favorite takeaways from the book, and it reminds me of the path that I'm on. And sometimes I like to wear motivational clothing so that when I catch myself in the mirror for a moment, again, I'm reminded of the path that I'm on. I'm looking to read more books. And so I've used that with tattoos. I have motivational tattoos that remind me of the person I'm becoming and the path that I'm on, and little trinkets all over my desk and my bookshelves and from the places that I've traveled. And so, again, it's this idea of constantly being reinforced to stay on the path, to be consistent, to leverage the compound effect, and to take advantage of this life that we have. So I'll pause there and see if that did an okay job explaining it.
No, that was great. I think I love the concept of play bigger triggers, and definitely need to get a cannon for myself. Um, so I think another question people might have, especially if they are reading more of these personal development nonfiction books, is how can they work on their retention and note taking, like how to read a book. I know there's a classic book that I also have over there, How to Read a Book. But you actually laid it out in a very systematic, practical, actionable way that I think could help kids even as they're reading textbooks and things that they have to read. But yeah, share some of those strategies.
When I was in the early days of starting Book Thinkers, it was still very much a side hustle. I started to see some interaction through email and social media from this guy named Kevin Horsley. And so I look up Kevin Horsley. He's becoming a fan of mine. And I see that he's written a book called Unlimited Memory. And there are thousands of Amazon reviews. This book seems like it's done pretty well. So I bought a copy. And as I'm reading Unlimited Memory, I'm reading Kevin's story. He grew up in South Africa, and he was sort of a boy with a broken brain. He couldn't read, he was dyslexic, he had some challenges retaining information. And so he started to study that subject. Now, fast forward a few years, he's entered into this Everest of Memory Championship type thing where he has to memorize the first 10,000 digits of pi. And we all know pi is a totally random number. And then the judge would say to the different people, what's digit number 7,221? And he'd have to know it like that. So Kevin went from not being able to retain or really read anything to memorizing 10,000 digits of pi. And so I reached out to Kevin and we started a friendship. And he's been a personal mentor of mine. We meet weekly, bi-weekly, sometimes monthly, and we have been for 5 or 6 years now. And a lot of my strategies, a lot of what I'm about to share come from Kevin. He's an incredibly smart human being. And he, just like you highlighted, likes to lay things out in a simple, systematic way. So I'll start off by saying that we need to be emotionally connected to the information we're consuming. If we can develop a why, if we can develop a strong reason, a connection to why we are reading this information, we're so much more likely to retain it, to build a stronger neural connection to the information. I see some exclamation points. I like that that's resonating. Oftentimes, getting back to the personal development piece, I'll ask somebody at a conference or if I'm speaking at an event and somebody comes up to ask me a question, I'll say, "What are you reading?" And they'll tell me Atomic Habits by James Clear or Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And instead of saying, "That's amazing, I've read that book too," I say, "Why?" And they oftentimes have a hard time telling me why they're reading the book. I think most people suffer from an intention deficit disorder. Just a little play on words there. They don't take the time to pause and pick a book that's meaningful for them. Whether it's for entertainment or education, either one of those two things is meaningful. Slow down a little bit. Pick something that you're emotionally connected to, a person you want to learn more about, a skill you want to solve, that kind of thing. And then the next kind of lesson there is that repetition leads to retention. So when I'm trying to retain something from a book, I'm trying to review that information as often as possible. Sometimes this gets under people's skin, the book purists out there, but I will rip a page out of a book, put it in my pocket, and carry it around with me for a couple of days so that
Wow.
I can review the information as often as possible and develop a stronger relationship. Because again, yeah, what was I going to say? Repetition leads to retention. Repetition leads to retention. So the more often you consume something, the more likely you are going to be to retain it. And I have a whole bunch of other strategies, but I think those are the two core things. Like if you could walk away from this conversation with just two things, be a little bit more intentional and emotionally connected to what you're reading. And then once you find a passage that's going to change your life or something that you want to remember, rip that page out, put it in your pocket, highlight it, read it as often as possible, rewrite it, teach it to your friends, simplify it in your head, put a little note in your phone, and then a reminder in your phone to check it out every single day. Post about it on social media, share it with everybody, and you'll be so much more likely to retain it if you do it that way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, one of the things that I liked was how you talked about sort of writing in the beginning of a book, like, obviously maybe when you're starting, but then your why right there, like stating your intention for why you're reading the book. In within Islam, like niyyah, the intention is so critically important. Also, when you were talking about the memory and stuff, like, I'm sure we have people in the audience who have memorized the entire Quran, which is pretty incredible, 600 page journey and often a language that they are not do not speak. So these memory ideas I think are transferable to lots of different skills. Are there any sort of digital thing like I've used that Readwise reader before to sort of highlight particular ideas, and then it sort of cycles them back through in sort of spaced repetition type way. Is that any sort of like tech tricks or hacks that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I think you just suggested a great one. Spaced repetition in any application is very useful because, again, that's repetition, it's repetition, it's repetition. And there's a forgetting curve. I forget who designed it at first, but the more often you repeat something up front, the more space you can have before you start to forget. And so those repetitions can start to space out a little bit. I'm a big fan of Evernote, just an online notebook. When I first started reading these books, I'd get really excited about all my favorite takeaways and I would write them down. I love writing pen to paper. And so I'd write them all down in this notebook and I lost the notebook. And
Ugh.
that's when I learned the lesson. You need something digital as well. So oftentimes I'll go through an entire book and we could go through that process in a little bit more detail too, but I'll go through an entire book. I try not to highlight more than 10 things. And then I'll go through those highlights at the end of the experience. I'll rewrite them all on a physical piece of paper, and then I'll take my favorite takeaways and also put them into an online Evernote notebook, which is accessible on all of my different devices. So if I need to review a negotiation tactic before I walk into a sales meeting and I don't have my notebook in front of me, I could just pull it up on my phone and go through it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. So a lot of our kids, people in the audience are pretty ambitious when it comes to their education. So they're, you know, they're probably more in the A student types, not necessarily, but there are quite a few people who are attracted to what I do who fall into that category. Robert Kiyosaki has another book, why A students end up working for C students, which I think is always an interesting one to consider. But yeah, how do you what advice would you give to that ambitious, hard driving teenager, about maybe how to lead a life more connected to their purpose, in the way that you've been able to do so?
I think there are so many great things about being an A student, and in a lot of ways, I wish I was one of them. And I've got some great A students that work for me. So I think sometimes in that Robert Kiyosaki quote, sometimes that does play out. It doesn't always play out that way though. A lot of my peers were definitely A students. Um, to answer that question, can you restate the question?
Oh man, you're making it hard for me. It
Yeah,
was sort of about finding
oh, passion,
purpose,
yes.
purpose and
Passion and
passion,
purpose.
maybe through reading. But I think what inspires me about your story is a lot of people think there's like this cookie cutter blueprint to success, and that ultimately it's all about getting the grades and then getting into the top college and then getting the job, and then finally at the end of the rainbow they're successful and then they'll be happy. And yet, the happiness advantage, that another great book talks about how it's actually we have the whole formula backwards. That it's not that success leads to happiness, it's that happiness leads to success. When we follow our passion, when we follow the calling that's inside of us, then we discover it. And it's clear to me that you have found that calling. So I guess, yeah, what advice would you give to kids, about that?
I have a few book recommendations here. I read a lot of books on purpose and passion. I think in the maybe 2018, 2019, 2020, those books were very popular. Books like Start With Why by Simon Sinek, and I read all of them. None of them really resonated with me. Now, I was doing something that brought me a lot of joy, but I couldn't articulate it very well until I read a book called Built to Serve by Evan Carmichael. I mentioned Evan briefly before. He's the one with the Dorito bag. Built to Serve by Evan Carmichael. And he has a very simple framework in that book called Who, Why, How. Who are you best positioned to serve? Why are you best positioned to serve them? And how do you serve them? And so it's funny because in that book, he starts off by asking you some pretty goofy questions. Who is your favorite teacher in school and why? What's your favorite movie and why? What music do you like listening to and why? And so you start journaling these seemingly unconnected prompts. And as you start going through the book, you start to look for patterns. You start to look for similarities between all of your answers, all the stories that are playing in your head. What brings you joy and from where does it come? And ultimately, I ended up in this who of like progress. I love helping other people make progress. People who are open and they're looking to solve a problem or build a skill or satisfy a curiosity, and I can help them get connected to the right book. That's fulfilling. Whenever I help other people make progress or even make progress in my own life, and then I rest my head on the pillow at night, I sleep really well. And Evan helped me articulate that. So that's my who. It's progress. It's people who are looking to make progress. So who, why? Why is that? Well, books changed my life. They took me from struggling in a lot of different ways. I was anxious on one side of the coin. I had a little bit too much ego that would represent itself at the expense of people around me on the other side. And that was a very confusing place to operate from. I had financial scarcity mindsets and a whole bunch of questions about my health, and I didn't have great relationships. And then a few years later, after reading and implementing all of these great books, I'm fulfilled, I'm certain, I'm confident, I'm altruistic, I'm empathetic. All of these things are emerging, and it happened because of books. So I'm best positioned to help people that are looking to go through that same journey. That's why. And how do I do that? I do it through social media content. I do it through podcasting. I do it through my own book. I do it through public speaking and a few of the other businesses that I'm involved in. And so that format of who, why, how, and all of the prompts inside of Evan's book, that's how I was able to get a little bit more clarity, I think, for myself and for other people on what I'm here to do. And at the end of the day, and the through line that's carried me since I read that book really is the idea that the right book at the right time can permanently change somebody's life. I
Mm.
genuinely believe that. There have been billions of people that have lived on this planet. Some of them have done it better, more efficiently in a healthier, happier way than others. They've documented those experiences for us. We can read their books, implement their favorite takeaways, and life is good. And so that's the purpose answer. It's Evan's book, Built to Serve. That's what did it for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, within the Muslim community, and actually let's just try this with the audience. What are the three careers that are acceptable for according to most Muslim parents? Let's see if how fast we can find those out in the chat. The big three. Doctor, okay, we got one. Medicine, lawyer, yep. What's teacher, engineer. Oh, someone got them all. Doctor, lawyer, engineer. So within our community, when I speak to I added up my meetings. I think I met with 750 families last year. And in the vast majority of the time, when you ask the students what they want to do, or you ask the parents what they want to do, it's usually one of those three professions. And yet, both of us have built interesting, wonderful lives, going a very different way. Um, there's nothing wrong with those professions, and for a lot of people, those are the perfect fit. But how can any advice you could share, or any books that you could recommend if people are trying to sort of find their way, figure out what is their thing, maybe get over the societal pressure and the familial social pressure to really try to find their way in life.
Yes, I have two recommendations for this. The first book is The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And although that book is primarily about delegation, automation, business efficiency, building an online business, that sort of thing, there's a section in the front half that talks about the new rich. Tim defines the new rich as somebody focused on time and mobility, not on material things. And Tim talked about a life where he traveled internationally. He only worked when he wanted to. He had enough, which was a concept that was new to me at the time, right? Enough. Oh, I thought you always have to strive for more until the day you die. And he just seemed to be at peace. He really enjoyed the passage of time. And I had never really been exposed to somebody like that. And he was one of the main inspirations for putting the pedal to the metal on book thinkers, right? I was working that 9 to 5 software sales job in the first half of my 20s. I was in a cubicle sometimes, although I had a little bit of travel. And he's one of the primary reasons that I got outside of that box, the societal norms that we talk about. Get a good 9 to 5 after your 4 year degree. Work, 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 work. At some point, have 2.5 kids. Get in a ton of debt. Work, 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 work. Only to realize when you're 65 or 70 or 75 at this point, that now you don't really have any appetite to travel anyway because you can't endure the time changes or the changes in your diet and you're not physically able to take advantage of it anymore. And so that book, The 4 Hour Work Week, it just blew my mind wide open. I thought, why do people work jobs that they dislike just to satisfy other people who really want the best for them and want them to be happy? They just don't know how to articulate it. And so Tim, with The 4 Hour Work Week, that's one book recommendation. Another one is called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. It's
Mhm.
by Eric Jorgensen. And he talks in that book about he talks about a ton of different subjects, but you highlighted something, which is that in the same thing in the happiness advantage, which is that oftentimes we pursue money first because we think that's the answer. We pursue money. Oh, I'll be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer for a while. And then I'll make my money and my parents will be happy. And then I'll move on and do what I truly want to do in the second half of my life. But life gets tough. You get married, you have kids, your responsibilities grow, you get stuck in a siloed industry, and it's really difficult to pivot the longer you wait. And so he talks about reprioritizing, focusing on things like happiness first. There's a great quote that I love from an Indian monk named Gaur Gopal Das, and it says, "It's not happy people that are grateful, but it's grateful people that are happy." Gratitude is the input. Gratitude is the practice. Gratitude is the thing you should focus on. And I would argue that that applies to the career choice that you make coming out of school as well. Focus on what brings you joy because it will be far more sustainable and you are far less likely to burn out if you do something that you love. So
Mm.
I'll quit ranting because I could talk about that subject all day. Unfortunately, I've seen so many people choose not to take that advice and they just don't love what they do. And it bums me out because here I am, I get out of bed every morning and I am thrilled to do the work that I do. I genuinely love it. And it stinks that that's not an option for some people.
Right. Yeah, no, I feel exactly the same way about what I'm doing now. But it took me a lot longer. It took me till about 45 before I finally found my ikigai, found that sweet spot of what I love, what I'm good at, what I can be paid well for, and what the world needs in terms of doing this, college prep for Muslim teenagers, helping them launch their side hustles with this Find Your Qibla program, helping them discover purpose, all this stuff, so that hopefully they don't have to, we're trying to short circuit the midlife crisis, at the teenage years. Um, yeah, and what you were just mentioning about gratitude, there's a verse in the Quran, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ, that if you are grateful, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you even more. The gratitude is foundational to pretty much every self-help book you've ever wanted. One exercise that I always recommend my students do, it's called the Alhamdulillah avalanche. So Alhamdulillah means like thanks be to God, praise to God. So you just write that word Alhamdulillah, comma, like 10 times on a piece of paper, and then you just write 10 things that you're grateful for. And if you start your day like that, you have an amazing day. It's just like it never fails. Um, so the other major pain point for people in the audience is around procrastination and time management. Almost every student, when I ask them, what do you need the most help with, they say time management, and just they can't, procrastination. An English paper is assigned. I have 2 weeks to do it. I find myself doing it midnight the night before, which guilty as charged. That's how I always used to work. Um, what are some recommendations on time management and procrastination, and books and maybe your own personal tips?
Yeah, just like you highlighted, I also used to suffer with that idea of doing my work at the last second, and that's called Parkinson's law. It states that a task will expand to the amount of time that you give it. And so if your teacher says it's due on Monday morning and you have 2 weeks to get it, or it's due in 2 weeks on Monday morning, you'll get it done on Sunday night. And so my simple recommendation there is just to shorten the deadline yourself. Give yourself an artificial deadline that's much closer to the present moment. Maybe split the amount of time you have available, 2 weeks in that example, and give yourself a little fake deadline to get the work done a week early, and then you'll still get it done. Um, Brian Tracy wrote a book called Eat That Frog. And I love this concept of eating the frog. It's the idea that imagine every single morning you had to wake up and at some point throughout the day, you'd have to eat a big, hairy, gross frog, like a literal animal frog. Well, if you wait all day to do it, then you're really eating it twice because you're eating it in your head all day long, dreading it, dreading it, dreading it, dreading it, procrastinating, procrastinating. And then at the end of the day, you still need to do it. But if instead Okay, good. I love somebody's got that book. If instead you wake up and it's the first thing you do, you eat that frog, well, now you have the rest of the day free. You don't have to think about it anymore. So, getting your work done immediately, as fast as humanly possible, by cutting those deadlines with an artificial Parkinson's law goalpost and eating that frog will just free up so much space for you. Those are a couple of the recommendations that I have and things that have worked really well
Hmm.
for me. I also, just to throw out another book recommendation, I love Essentialism by
Hmm.
Greg McKeown. Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And the subtitle might be something like Doing More with Less. And he talks a lot about the 80-20 principle, Pareto's principle. And it states that 20% of your activity will most likely create 80% of the results. And so if you were like me and you were always looking to skirt around the rules in class and with your homework and things like that, I would always focus on the 20% of the work that was the most meaningful. That way, I could get 80% of the work done. And oftentimes, when you study subjects, there are core foundations, core principles, core ideas in each one of those subjects that you're working on for school. And you could just study those cores and you'll be okay. So, always focused on the highest leveraged activities first.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I was just listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast with I forget his name.
Greg?
Greg McKeown, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And incidentally, that 4 Hour Work Week book, I meant to mention this when you mentioned it. That was for me the trigger. It was, I read it during right in the middle of COVID when I'd sort of reached that, you know, I knew I needed to do something different, but I didn't know what it was. And that book just was like a firecracker going off in my head. And what I love is now Tim Ferriss has a podcast. I think that's sort of how you mentioned how you first got into this work. Incidentally, are there other podcasts that you would recommend that the audience might benefit from for people who are more audio centric?
Yes. In my podcast listening has gone down quite a bit, but the first podcast that I ever started to listen to, and I think the information is still very much relevant, was called The Science of Success by Matt Bodner. The Science of Success by Matt Bodner. I love that podcast. And then I got into the Tim Ferriss show, which you just highlighted. And I've listened to hundreds of those interviews. I love Tim. He's a human guinea pig. He's always experimenting. He comes first with curiosity
Mm-hmm.
instead of judgment. And I love that. He just wants to understand how world-class people in every discipline become world-class. And he's an excellent question asker and things like that. Um, I would recommend the Book Thinkers podcast, Book Thinkers Life-Changing Books. One of the guys on my team, James Bracken, he hosts a podcast called the You Can Too Show. And that's a fantastic podcast. He interviews a lot of these types of authors. How I Built This by Guy Raz. It's a fantastic podcast. My theme is always kind of that entrepreneur meets personal development meets health and fitness junkie type show. And those are the ones that resonate with me the most.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Um, I think maybe another one or two last questions, and then we can see some from the audience. You talked about sort of the concept of upgrades in your thinking in Book Thinkers, sort of mindset shifts to sort of you know flip the switch to the next level, and I really liked how you laid it out. Could you share some of these upgrades that if you were going back to your teenage self and trying to give him some advice, what would some of those upgrades that could really shift the trajectory for these teenagers?
Yeah, the first thing that really started to work for me was shifting from a victim to a hero in my own story, knowing that I had a little bit more agency than I was giving myself credit for. And There were a lot of different situations that I would say things like I can't. And I was instantly putting myself as the victim of the situation. I can't run that distance, or I can't lift that weight, or I can't make that much money, or I can't travel to that country. And I was making myself a victim. Instead, the hero says, "How can I?" instead of "I can't." How can I run that distance? How can I lift that weight? How can I make that money? How can I travel there? And that shift, it just did so much. Again, instead of rejecting all of the possibilities that life has to offer us, how can we open ourselves up, get curious, and start to ask questions? How instead of I can't? So that was a really big one for me. The next one that I list in the book, I just opened up the chapter, is the You Can Learn from Everyone upgrade. I used to It was so funny because even though I was a C student, I had a little bit of an ego. I was kind of a know-it-all. I always thought that I knew best. And so oftentimes I wouldn't really listen. I wouldn't fully pay attention to what people were sharing with me because oftentimes I thought I knew better. And then over time, I started to realize that every single person on this planet knows something of value that they can share with me. And so
Mm,
again, if I theme is curiosity, I guess, if I can be a little bit more curious and I can ask the right questions, I can start to learn from every single person that I interact with. And instead of, again, leading with judgment, lead with curiosity. Try to understand why other people who have a totally different view than you do, how do they think that way? Why do they think that way? And that has opened me up to a lot of books. I mean, books about subjects that I didn't necessarily want to read about, or authors that I didn't necessarily agree with based on what I saw on social media or in the review section, but approaching those books and saying, I bet I can learn something from that person. The next one that I have in the book is The Astronaut Upgrade. And the idea is if you start to zoom out, right? I'm calling in from Massachusetts. I know you are too. We start to zoom out and we look at the United States as a whole. Then we start to zoom out a little bit more and you start to look at the world as a whole. Our problems start to seem a little bit less significant once we start to zoom out than they are when we're fully zoomed in on them. And that allows you a little bit of space for reflection, a little bit of space to breathe. And so now, whenever I'm presented with something that maybe my reaction is fight or flight or freeze, I just try to zoom out a little bit, get a little bit more processing time so that I can be less emotionally reactive and a little bit more logical. Give
mm,
myself some space, some grace. I know it's all going to be okay. And I'll mention one more, which is the Memento Mori upgrade. We talked a little bit about the subject of death earlier, but I'm a big fan of Stoicism. It's a school of philosophy that started in ancient Greece and then moved over to Rome and became more popular recently with authors like Ryan Holiday. And in Stoicism, this concept of memento mori, it's a Latin phrase that translates to remember you will die. Sounds a little grim at first, but unfortunately today, so many of us, we just sit there and we scroll on our phones and we watch social media and we think, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll be Superman tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll defeat the resistance. Tomorrow I won't procrastinate. Tomorrow I'll be the best version of myself. And then tomorrow rolls around and you say the same thing about the following day. And so the memento mori upgrade is about reminding yourself that life, at least in the physical sense, is finite. And we are going to age, and we might as well take advantage of this time that we have now. The youth, that's the word you used earlier, the youth that we have now. Take advantage of it. And what's beautiful about the personal development world is that every single time you invest in a book and you improve your life, you get to leverage that improvement for the rest of time. And so the earlier you start, I wish I was reading books when I was a teenager. The earlier you start, the longer you could take advantage of what you've learned. And that's a beautiful way to think about it. So those are a few of the upgrades, a few of the mindset shifts that I went through.
yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and someone was asking where do these upgrades come from, and they are in fact from Nick's book Rise of the Reader, and so oh, that's the hardcover, nice. So I know you had been generous enough to donate some signed copies of that. So what I'm going to do. for the most part is sort of after the webinar, so we don't get too busy. I'm going to sort of spin the wheel with the people who showed up live today. I'll get the Zoom report and we'll try to get some copies off. But also I want to give some people a chance to you know um, maybe qualify for one while we're on the call. So I want to just switch over to the Q&A, and if there's some really insightful questions there, then maybe we could choose those people for for a book. So um, let's see. So from my wife, Ruhina Razvi, what is your advice for kids who don't like to read? How can they get started?
I think I think that we should choose subjects that are really interesting and relevant to their lives. And there are a couple of places to go. I probably sound like a broken record, but remember, repetition leads to retention. So, is there a problem that they're facing on a daily basis at school or in their personal life? And is there a good, friendly book that can help them solve that problem? They will be emotionally connected to reading that book and then taking action on what they've read. Or is there a specific skill or hobby that they're interested in getting involved in? And is there a great book about the basics of that skill or hobby that they can read? Again, they'll be more emotionally connected in the outcome. An example could be a sport or a snow sport like skiing, or maybe they're interested in getting into woodworking as a little bit of a side hustle, or whatever the subject is. Every single child, I imagine, is unique in that, but foster their existing creativity with a supplemental resource like a good book or some of their favorite people, people that they want to learn about. Even if it's a celebrity or something in pop culture, there are so many great books that are written about these people. And that's what did it for me. I read a lot of biographies and autobiographies and memoirs when I first got into the reading space because I had heard about these iconic entrepreneurs, names like Steve Jobs, and then you go on Amazon, Steve Jobs, and wow, Walter Isaacson wrote a wonderful biography about him. I want to learn about him, and it plays like a movie in my head, and so I get really involved in the content, and then I wish that it wasn't over, even though I didn't like reading. And so just aligning the book choice with solving problems or building skills or satisfying existing curiosities, I think will really help foster that emotional connection and get them in there. And also the other thing, I'll say also a lot. I like to I like to continue adding on. That's how my brain works. But back to the very first thing I shared today. These behaviors are caught, not taught. And so make sure that as a parent, you are reading physical paper books, solving problems, building skills, and satisfying curiosities in front of your children. And eventually they will want to replicate that behavior as well.
Yeah, and I agree. As you can see, I have a lot of physical books all around me, and I grew up. My mom was the head of the English department at the Windsor School, and I, grew up in a very literary environment. What are your thoughts on Kindle and Audible and audiobooks and things like that? I assume I know you sort of got your start through audio. That's actually how I consume a majority of probably what I read.
I used to know this statistic off the top of my head, but roughly 80% of the inputs to our brain are visual. And so while I love listening to audiobooks, I listen to them knowing that there's a lower chance that I'm actually going to develop a connection to the information I'm listening to and enough to really take action on it, which is what I focus on. I consume a ton of audiobooks, probably more than most human beings on this planet. And I love listening to them while I'm in the car or at the gym or doing housework or even in the shower sometimes. I've always got either a podcast playing or an audiobook on. I think my mentor that I mentioned who memorized the 10,000 digits of pi, he's really moved into the Kindle world recently. And he said to me a cool metaphor recently. He said, Nick, reading a physical paper book is like using a physical paper map to get from point A to point B. He said, a Kindle is like a GPS. There are so many great functions in a Kindle. And I do use my Kindle from time to time, but I really prefer physical paper for a lot of reasons. What's great about the Kindle is the ability to look up definitions in real time, the ability to take notes and highlight and export your notes and share them with other people. Uh, and then also having 1,000 books in a small little device like that is a little bit more efficient than what you can see behind me. I've got a lot of paper, but I like to play bigger triggers. So those are some of my thoughts on those.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of people are asking. I mean, it looks like someone just put a lot of the books that we've mentioned in a curated list, which is great. Um, what about? I know you shared with me before, a list of recommended books. Could you tell us where we can find that, or drop the link in the chat or something?
Yes, funny enough, I can only send to hosts and panelists or you directly. So let me drop this. I don't have an all
Yeah.
webinar option. So let me drop this link to you directly and then you
Okay.
can paste it to
Perfect.
everybody. So this is a link on my website, bookthinkers.com. It's under the for readers section. And if you mouse over for readers on a desktop, you'll see all the different genres that I provide recommendations for. Or you could just scroll through and see what catches your eye.
Great. Yeah, I just posted it for everyone. Um, so I think you have access to these questions as well. There are now quite a few of them.
Oh, perfect.
If you see one that grabs your attention, please go for it. Not, I'm gonna keep looking through them as well. Um,
Sure, I'll start scrolling through. I just brought them up. What age did I start reading? I started reading when I was 20 or 21 years old. Seriously. I wish I started much earlier than that. I've heard some fun and creative ways, I think, for parents to encourage kids to read a little bit more. I mean, I highlighted, I think, how you can get your children a little bit more connected by demonstrating reading for them and then helping them pick books that they're emotionally connected to. I've also met plenty of people who pay their children to read books like Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, for example, as a chore option. So there are so many different fun ways to incentivize children. And I think that, who knows? I now have a young child, and as he gets a little bit older, maybe that'll be a fun way to boost his allowance or something like that.
yeah, I saw a great social media post where it was someone saying like, I told my kid that I'd pay him $1 for every book he read. I'm out $35 this year. He thinks he's like fleecing me. It's best investment I ever made type thing.
That's
Yeah.
perfect.
And incidentally, and I shared this in an email where I was sort of inviting people to this webinar. I used to teach, among many other things, sixth grade English. And so, the first thing we do every year was summer reading. We go over the summer reading list, and I have a carefully curated summer reading list. Actually, I'll try to dig it up and share it in the chat. Um, but there are they had to read at least two books from this list. A lot of the kids spend the whole summer avoiding it like the plague, and like, that Parkinson's law thing. 2 days before they sort of do a perfunctory read of the books. Then these other kids would come in and they'd read 20, 25 books over the summer. And scroll forward 7 years when I was helping them with the college application process, there was never a student who was a reader of that level in sixth grade who didn't go on to an amazing top tier college. And now that I've been doing it for so long and gone on to build an amazing life after that. And these were not personal development books. These were fantasy. These were, it was just reading. It was just that very act of reading. So sorry to editorialize there. Yeah.
Oh no, no, I love it. I love it. I think that's the first thing you shared about the 35 books and the kid thought that he was fleecing his parents. Like that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, best investment you can make. I see a question in here. What strategy do you recommend for those who constantly get reading slumps and feel discouraged? I think James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, was sharing on the Tim Ferriss podcast one time that when you choose a goal like reading every day, and life gets in the way and things get complicated and you really can't fit it in, just shrink your task. If your goal is to read 15 pages, just read one page that day. And one page only takes 1 minute. You could leave the book by your nightstand. It could be the first thing you do when you wake up. It could be the last thing you do before you go to bed. Just read one page that day. And even if, yeah, you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling stressed out and you're discouraged, switch up the book, give up on the book, go to the next one. Life is too short to read bad books. You don't have to finish every book you start. And just shrink the task, make it a little bit more manageable, and then start to build some consistency out, one page per night or morning, and then get to two, and then back up to five, and back up to 10 as you get more connected to the books you're reading again.
Yeah, beautiful. There's one simple question, but important one. How do we make time to read? I think you shared this earlier. Maybe not everyone was here. But this the concept of the Eisenhower matrix, and reading falls into that category of things that are important but not urgent. And so how do we schedule time to for pushing our big goals forward, such as reading? Like, what are some real practical strategies? Like, what's your reading? Like, you do so much. What does your reading habit look like?
Things have changed a little bit over the last 4 months since we just had our first baby, but generally speaking, as things normalize again, when I wake up in the morning, I typically exercise first thing. So I'll bring my dog out for a walk. I'll get some morning exercise, some morning sunlight before I consume any caffeine or anything like that. Get the sun into my eyes, get the exercise endorphins flowing. I'll come back and then I'll read. And sometimes we think about, I can't get my reading done at the end of a day where I'm burned out and the kids are running around and everybody's yelling and I'm exhausted and I'm falling asleep when I pick up the book. Of course, you're exhausted, you're spent, your willpower is gone, it's depleted. So I like to read when my energy is at its highest, which for me is in the morning. And so that reading window could be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes longer, especially on the weekends. I try to read for about an hour a day. On the weekends, a little bit longer. It's one of my favorite things to do, obviously. But what I mentioned in the beginning of the call, and maybe not everybody was here, was just this idea of reading for 15 minutes in the morning or 15 minutes in the evening before you go to bed. And instead of trying to find that time, replace a low impact activity like social media scrolling or watching television with reading a good book. No, it's not as entertaining in the short term, but you're investing in yourself. From a fiction perspective, it might be as entertaining, if not more entertaining, than the junk that you're going to find on your screens. And then from the nonfiction perspective, it might not be as entertaining, but it is useful. And you can solve these problems and build these skills and develop a different person. I mean, I'm a completely different human being today than I was 10 years ago. And I'll tell you this too. I mean, I have a hard time remembering the main characters in TV shows I watched 2 years ago, maybe even 6 months ago. And that just shows you how little impact those things have. So sacrificing a little bit of TV, a little bit of Netflix or social media is not going to hurt your life.
Nice. Do you see any other questions in there that grab your attention?
Here, I'll start scrolling through
I'm
again.
just looking for my summer reading list, so I'm a little distracted.
Okay, what advice do you give to a college student that is pursuing a field that may not really suit their skill set, yet is doing it for status, money, and stability? Oof, that's a tough one.
That one's getting a book. I don't know
Okay,
who asked that one.
Jay Dreer, you're getting a
Okay.
book.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, I mean it's tough for me to give you advice that would really pivot your life on a call like this, but I would recommend exploring books like we talked about. Both of us up here have really been influenced by the 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, and it talks about prioritizing time and flexibility and mobility and passion and love for what you do over things like status, money, and stability. And another book recommendation for that is a book called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. Die with Zero. And again, it's this concept of society's box. Society prioritizes and values things like status, money, and stability. And then you do that thing, whatever it is, you sacrifice, you do a job that you don't love for 40 years only to regret it. And so my advice would be read some of those books, see if they help change your perspective so that you don't fall into that, that trap that so many people do. Another third book recommendation, and I love this one. The theme is death today, but it's The Top Five Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie
Mm,
Ware.
mm,
So Bronnie Ware was an end-of-life palliative care nurse, meaning she would spend the last couple of days or weeks, sometimes months, with somebody as they passed away from old age. And she would spend a lot of time talking with these people. And she realized that pretty much everybody had regrets. She kind of consolidated them into five buckets. And the first one, the number one most common regret for people on their deathbed, was that they wish they lived a life based on what made them happy instead of what made other people happy. And that message, when you read it and you read all of the heartbreaking stories in the book, might help you reconsider that decision. Just because you don't want to end up regretting working something for status when at the end of the day, you'll come to realize status didn't matter anyway.
yeah,
The name of that last one I just saw people asked is The Top Five Regrets of the Dying.
yeah. It's interesting, and someone had pointed this out in the chat that this remembering death, remembering the finiteness of life, is such a central concept within Islam. Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. Every single person will taste of death, and that's really, when we talk about I mentioned Akhirah focused college prep. Akhirah is the hereafter, is the English translation. So, in other words, we're preparing students not just to be successful in this life, but also to be successful in the next. And so all this talk of death is, you know um, one of the most important things we can think about. Like, one of the tests recently, my daughter was struggling with this decision about, whether to take a trip. And I gave her I think it was Bill Gates who told me the 80-year-old test, like where you try to imagine, what advice would your 80-year-old self tell to you about this decision? And usually you'll find a lot of wisdom from that. So we have time for maybe one or two more. So sorry, I again don't have the Q&A. Oh,
No, it's
and I,
okay.
yeah.
I saw what is your advice for a teenager who's reading a book to retain the information and answer questions for an upcoming tournament? That book I recommended before, Unlimited Memory by Kevin Horsley. What an amazing book. I'll throw one more out there since I had already mentioned that. A book called The Art of Learning by Joshua Waitzkin.
Mm,
What's unique about Joshua Waitzkin is that he was a chess champion. So he was a very competitive chess player, but he was also a mixed martial artist. Two very different disciplines, one intellectual, one physical. But the art of learning talks about his retention strategies, his studying strategies, and how he was able to become world class in two completely different things in such a short period of time.
yeah. Well, that's he is one of Tim Ferriss's first guests, and
He
I've
is, yeah.
heard him a number of times. That's great. But, to make sure I don't forget, where can people find you? I think our audience, didn't know about you, and now I think they're true fans. So I want to make sure that they know. I know you said you do a lot of stuff on social media. So other than the website, which I can easily drop in there, where else should people find you?
Yeah, our in a note on social media quickly, I believe, and this is one of the core values in our business or mission statements, is that social media can be a positive and constructive place, depending on who you choose to follow and
Mm,
what types of content you choose to consume. And so I just wanted to state that for all of the parents in the room. We use all of the different platforms. Instagram is our primary platform. So Instagram at Book Thinkers. You can find the link to that on the website as well. We've got a couple 100,000 followers there. I think in the last month we did 1.5 or 2 million organic impressions with our Instagram content, and it's all positive. It's safe for kids. It's all focused on constructive subjects in this personal development and nonfiction book world.
Mm. That's great. And are you do you I know you have the podcast. Are there book clubs or other things that you recommend if people like want to be in a more collaborative environment that you know of?
We've tried out a bunch of different formats somewhat unsuccessfully. We have a
Mm.
newsletter, we have the podcast. I think
Mhm.
that our Instagram comment section sometimes feels like a community with people
Mhm.
sharing ideas back and forth. And there will be something launched later this year. I'm just not ready to share it yet. So
Okay.
there will
Oh,
be a
cool.
formal book thinkers community
Mhm.
that people can get a little bit more involved in, and I think it'll be entirely free. So stay tuned for that as well.
That- that's great. Um, well, it was such a pleasure, having you as a guest. I think so much of the very first word revealed in the Quran was Iqra, which is usually translated as read or recite, and so reading is so central, to our mission and to the Islamic tradition. And I would argue that we're quite ways away from the Islamic golden age. And I think in order to get back there, we need this next generation of kids to fall back in love with the written word. And I think you've given both in your story and what it's done for you and the life that you've been able to build on the back of reading. And I'm sure everyone has noticed talking to you that like you don't seem like a 31-year-old. Like, how do you have so much wisdom? And it's because you're standing on the shoulders of giants, because you've consumed so many of their ideas. And I think more than anything, that's what I want for for the students that I work with and so on. I just wanted to drop the link for the program. Oops, that's not it. Um, sorry, give me a second.
Yeah,
Uh,
as you're getting ready for that, thank you for all of the kind comments in the webinar chat. I just pulled that up and a lot of people have a lot of great things to say. So thank you so much. And I did want to offer too for anybody that shoots me a DM on Instagram at BookThinkers. I answer all of them. Sometimes it takes me a day or sometimes up to a week. But if you need a custom book recommendation based on a problem that you're facing or a skill you want to build, you're more than welcome to shoot those thoughts my way and I'll answer them.
that's great. Here we go. I'm just trying to copy this. There we go. Yeah. So, and as I mentioned, I know some people haven't weren't here in the beginning. In terms of what we do, helping Muslim teenagers get into their dream colleges, our core program is called Find Your Qibla. We only open it up a few times a year. Our next cohort is starting in Ramadan. It's an 8-week intensive program to help kids discover their purpose and then launch a side hustle, launch a passion project, which, as you can see, with what Book Thinkers became, what Five Before College has become, can end up giving your children lots of purpose. And inshallah, also, when teenagers start doing real world things like this, they really stand out in that college admissions game, become those red umbrellas that we were talking about in the very beginning. So I dropped the link for Find Your Qibla. It's a short application. If you fill that in, then you scheduled a meeting with one of my team members, Brother Patrick, another Harvard grad, another American Muslim convert, Harvard grad who you'll do a short meeting with, and then they can put you through to a longer meeting with me. But Nick, this has been incredible. Thank you so much. I know you don't live too far away. Hopefully, we'll see each other in person one of these days. But thanks again, and I can't wait to figure out who's going to win these books. There were a few. I'm going to look back through the questions when I have a little more headspace to try to identify some and maybe do some random drawings as well. So thank you so much. Jazakallah khair, and we'll talk again soon. Thank